like applicational, so you'll try to use terms and stuff. But if you're not doing finance, you know, you don't need to get like really crazy into it. But like taking me and Laura's class, combining it, it'll give you like, it'll familiarize you with just like a broad and like way of how things work. So she'll teach you like a lot of definitions that they use, right? And I'll show you like which ones are actually like people use, like in general. So what's like good, what's bad, what's you know, what's important. So because there's a lot of definitions out there, but not all of them mean the same thing. That was just a quick intro. So I mean, I'm going to review some stuff that I covered in the mock class because that's how I have to start out. And I understand there were still questions anyways. So start off. Okay. Cool. One thing for this class is, I mean, you guys are free to take notes. This class, everything you learn in this class, like you'll need to take like just a few notes, something that's important, and have your laptop possibly, because you'll actually be able to practice my teaching. So actually, you really need your laptop, but if you don't want to, whatever. Okay, so
during class, do we see like the last time? For example, we see Google Finance.
yeah, but it's going to get more deep into that, obviously, because that was just a mock class for 2-3 hours. So I have more stuff, but it's just, yeah, just trying to understand things. Okay. Does everyone have a laptop, by the way? If not, try to share with someone for now.
Sure, what you're saying.
Or,
Yes.
no, it's actually good that way. So, but you guys are in my mock class. I don't want to repeat this, but you know, it's okay. Let's just start off. Okay. That's weird. Can you guys see that, by the way? Or is there a light?
In this one?
No. I didn't write investor.
No, gross investor or value investor.
Okay, that's good. You still remember, right?
Yes.
That's good. Cool. So this class will, like, half of it will be sort of the mock class, but like, I'll make sure, like, because you really have to get that down to go further, right? So what I covered during the mock class, does everyone remember? So let's just recap, right? So these are different types of personalities, right? Now Keita, during the mock class, he said that, oh, sometimes I have many different types of stock, so I'm not any one of these investors. But a lot of people who invest seriously, whether they're in finance or they know about finance, but they're doing something else, they have some money they want to invest, they usually pick a personality. 3, 4. The reason why they pick one of these is because you can make the most money from it. Does that make sense sometimes? Like, that might not be 100% correct, because let's say you randomly pick all these stocks, and then boom, 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 they all go up, you make a lot of money, right? But usually everybody has a personality, and the reason why is because all these personalities have sort of like a father, right? Or, so for example, like in 1800 or something, right? There's this famous investor, and he followed this method. So they named him, after growth. So for example, a very famous value investor is Warren Buffett, right? Other famous, Benjamin Graham. You don't need to know these names, but I'm sure you guys are familiar with Warren Buffett or whatever, right? So he's a value investor, and he's sort of like, they kind of call him the grandfather or father of investing. So, anyways, someone want to tell me what a growth investor is? This is quick. Alright, let's start off with value first. Come on. I'll have all day.
The stock has more value zone, right?
Yeah, that's true. But one more thing, right? When you think of definitions, anything for finance, right? Don't try to memorize stuff like that. Okay? Everything in finance, almost everything, it's in the word, right? So when I ask you a question, you can think of it by looking at the word, right? So you remember a growth investor, right? These are people who invest in growth companies, right? And what does grow mean? To grow, right? So they just invest in like growth companies. And usually these companies are expensive, right? Because companies that grow very fast, right, they tend to gain a lot of value. And I'll give you quick examples that you'll probably recognize, right? For example, if you didn't think of Netflix. Netflix is, do you guys know what that is? So Netflix is, they sell like DVDs of movies and stuff. They're like a DVD movie like business. All these famous American movies, they sell some foreign movies, and they have a site. But for example, Netflix, right? They're actually at $105 now, but before they were at like $289 or something, right? These are just stock prices, right? Apple, right? Apple was at like $345. So you guys know this because these are famous companies. Google was like at 500. Let's think of another one. Priceline, 500. Also, when you take notes for this class, try to. So I'm giving these examples, right? But you don't need to write everything down. It's sort of just like understanding the concept, right? So usually, if a stock is, I would say less than $70. So if it's less than $70, it's you don't. This is like debatable, but it's not really expensive. Does that make sense? So like if you see any stock over $100, it's definitely expensive. $100 or over, it's just definitely expensive, right? Because you think, right? So for example, every company usually has a lot of shares. You remember Laura's class? Stock, right? So they have about like 10 million shares, for example, or more. If you multiply 10 million by 200 or 10 million by 300, you get a very big number. Right? It's actually much bigger. It's like something like 400 or something, 800. It depends. But, so that's why these companies are expensive. Because if you multiply 410 million times a stock that's only $2, right? That means the entire company is only 810 million, which is actually pretty small. When you think of companies, remember Laura gave you like mid-cap, small, large cap? Right? So, large cap, mid cap, small cap. Right? Less than 10 million. Oops. Crap. Right here. But yeah, it's not that important. Right. So you can remember this pretty easily, right? If a company is less than $10 million, it's pretty small, right? Basically, in general, any company that's 500 million or less is a pretty small company. So less than $500 million, right? It's a pretty small company. You can think of big companies. Big companies are usually in the billions. At least 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion. Even 1 billion is actually pretty small. Okay? So you can think of big companies as at least 1 billion, but it's usually a lot more. Like think 100 billion, 200 billion, 300 billion. Does that make sense? Right. So what we can just know from this is just like bigger companies are at like $100 billion, $200 billion. The entire company, that's how much they're worth, right? And you can think about it too. For example, let's say, oh, the richest person in the world, right? Warren Buffett by himself, right? He has $1 billion. But like normally, like rich people might only have they make $20 million a year, so they might have only $300 million in total. If one person can have $300 million and he's very wealthy, that means that a company should have much more than that, because a company is like made up of a lot of people, right? A company is like a huge thing. It's like 10,000 people. So you should definitely think in the billions for big companies. So for big companies, think like in the 10 billions or more. Does that make sense? So millions is usually smaller, and billions is larger. And if it's less than $1 million, that's even smaller. That's like a mom and pop shop. That's what we call it. So, and it's not important, but you guys, you can just keep this in mind. So you know your mom and dad. So when your mom and dad, they might run like a very successful small business, but their small business is probably less than $1 million, unless they're really like amazing, right? So we call it a mom and pop because mom is for your mom, right? Pop is for your dad, right? So that's why we call it mom and pop shop. Okay. So there's no questions here, right? $1 billion is big, million is usually smaller, right? Cool. So that's to give you perspective on like companies and stuff. And mid cap's like in the middle and stuff, so you can think about it, right? Maybe like 500 million, 200 million, probably more, So just to get an estimate of how things work, right? So this is what Laura was teaching you. Now Laura gave you ranges, right? But you don't need to memorize those ranges usually. Just try to memorize the small and the big, and that's easy, right? Because the large is like $1 billion. The small is usually in the millions. Now, to get back to this thing over here. Is there a glare? I see like a light. Anyways. So to start off, there's a lot of personalities in investing, right? So we went to growth. Growth companies are usually expensive, right? A company that grows very fast, usually technology companies grow very fast, right? And then I explained that during the mock class. Technology companies grow fast because they release new products, right? So if Apple releases a new product, right? Because there's always good news going on. Tech companies try to create a lot of good news. So when they create a lot of good news, the stock price keeps going higher and higher and higher. But to contrast that, think of a company like, let's say, think of a construction company. Does everyone know construction? So like building houses. Do you think a construction company is a growth company? Yes or no? Why?
Because they don't.
They have manual. They have manual for a long time ago. The way how to construct don't change.
Right, that's sort of on there. The answer is actually, a construction company is not a growth company because obviously they don't release new products every day, right? Because they can't, they can't build a new house every minute, right? But so what we call this is, well, we don't really have a name, but the way to describe it is, so construction usually does long-term projects, right? You build a house and it takes like 19 years, or sometimes faster, but it's usually like 1 year, 6 months. Anything big takes like 5, 10 years. Think about a subway system, right? House takes a long time. These companies are usually not growth because, well, they just take a long time to grow. So even though construction companies can sometimes be like $200 per share, right? Any company can actually be very expensive, right? But just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's a growth company. Does that make sense? Because growth, yeah, it has to grow, right? So a construction company might be growing temporarily, but it's not going to be, hey, what's up? But it's not going to be, growing forever, right? So does that make sense? So when I say over here that, so a growth companies are usually expensive, right? When I ask you to say, what's a growth investor? They invest in growing companies, right? Don't think about it. Just look at the word. Are we all good? Next thing is okay. Does everybody remember what a value company is? Roberto, you want to come? Yeah, let's go.
Just doing something else for you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, my bad.
It's good.